So this is a chapter on resistance training, but most of the chapter is focused on what's called a needs analysis. So when somebody comes in, when your client comes in and maybe they want to do strength and conditioning training with you, as an exercise physiologist, it could be the case that you need to do some of these graded exercise tests. You need to do an assessment of muscular strength and endurance and body composition so that you can work with this client in the future to help them with sport performance or weight management or such. And if that's the case, you need to know what your client needs. What does your client need in terms of improvement in sport or flexibility or whatever? The summer is starting and a lot of the seasons are beginning. So, as a strength and conditioning specialist or a coach, I would want to know what are the needs of my athlete in terms of sport needs, but also in terms of training needs and goals. And this chapter here, I think, is one of the best in terms of explaining what it is that an athlete would need at various steps in terms of their training development and their season. Um, so I think it's important to share this chapter with you. It's one of the best and most important chapters in any of the books I've really read. Um, So the chapter starts by needs analysis, which is an evaluation of requirements or sports, or what does an athlete need to be successful in training for their sport. In that, you'll have to take a look at things like exercise type, technique, the equipment available, how much time you have available, and you'll need to determine things like how many times per week are they going to train, what is the load, what exercises should they choose, all right? And then you're going to have to arrange those exercises to make some type of training plan, like the plan that I showed you last class for the kids. In doing that, you'll need to figure out how many reps, how many sets. We started talking a little bit about this with your 1RM max and establishing your 1RM max so that you can set the appropriate intensity of your exercise based on loads and repetitions to achieve that muscle development, hypertrophy, or muscle endurance, or muscle maintenance. So depending upon your training goals, so we'll have to establish training goals. And then we have to figure out how to increase those lows based on percentages of your 1RM max so that you can continue to increase your exercise intensity, so that you can push your athletes towards overreaching and therefore experience gains in terms of strength and conditioning and cardiovascular fitness. So in the beginning of allowing somebody or a client to do a resistance training program, we need to do a little bit of homework. We need to do our PAR-Q, our physical activity readiness questionnaire, a lifestyle evaluation, a medical history questionnaire. We need to do the due diligence prior to having them exercise to make sure it's safe. Once they've finished the PAR-Q and all of that stuff, and they have clearance if they need it from um, their medical professional, then what we need to do is figure out what the athlete needs. And we need to put together a training program to address those particular needs. So that's what this chapter talks about, figuring out how to do that. So at the end of this chapter, you'll be able to put together a training plan, a printable training plan that you could give to your client and then charge them and use this plan as the basis of your business. So the first step of a needs analysis is to evaluate the sport. All right. What will the sport require of the athlete if they're trying to be successful? Now, every sport is different. So you have to try to contemplate what would be different about a soccer player compared to a gymnast, compared to a ballerina, compared to a person who's doing a ninja warrior, right? For somebody who's doing swimming, they're going to have slow glycolysis in terms of their bioenergetics. They're going to have um, a large range of motion in their shoulder. They're going to have good shoulder stability, probably strength in arm flexion and extension. And but somebody who is a ballerina might have to do things like full range of motion in their hips. They might have to keep weight down. They may have to do plyometrics. So there might be different needs given the particular sport. So somebody who does gymnastics is going to have completely different exercise plan than somebody who's doing rowing potentially. Or even within the sport, there may be differences. Like a wide receiver in football may have very different sport needs than somebody who is a quarterback or an offensive lineman or something. So what we'll need to do is we'll need to evaluate the sport first, and then we'll need to evaluate the athlete. So what training status is the athlete in? Are they just beginning? Are they an 8-year-old kid who is just starting gymnastics, or are they a 17-year-old kid who's been training with the same coach for 8 or 9 years? And then if that's the case, you can use that information in regards to their training status to appropriately set your training duration, frequency, and intensities. So we want to know what physical tests are available to assess the training status of the athlete. And I can show you a number of them. And how do you use those assessments to evaluate? Now, we've done a number of physical assessments already. That's the reason that we taught you those physical assessments, the heart rate and blood pressure, body composition, your VO2 max assessment, and then your assessments of push up, curl up. There's a number of other ones that you would do prior to, allowing a client to work out, but they're part of assessing the athlete's, first of all, physical well-being and health status. That's what I taught you in lab. But then there are a number of other evaluations that you can utilize to take a look at things like agility, speed, power, and I'll show you those later on. Then what you want to do is figure out what your primary resistance training goals are. Where are you in your off season or your season? Where are you in terms of your training goals? And those training goals are either muscle building, strength and power, muscle endurance, or muscle maintenance. It's pretty much what we're talking about. So where during your periodization cycle are you, and what are we working on in terms of our muscle mass or um, muscle goals? So that's step one in the needs analysis. So step one, like we said, is a two-stage process where what you're doing is you're evaluating the sport and then you're evaluating the athlete. And by evaluating the sport, the first thing is that we want to figure out what movements are going to be performed in that sport. For instance, with swimming, your upper arm motion needs to be, upper arm range of motion, um, flexion and extension of your hip so that your legs can kick through the water. If you're doing the butterfly, you would have your stretching and hollowing of your upper body so that you can do your dolphin kick, right? But if you're doing something like baseball, it would be more like running, or it would be more like rotation of your upper body. It would be more like extension of your arms and like a chest press. It would be um, throwing techniques. If you're doing something like basketball, it would be more like dribbling, jumping, plyometrics, shooting strength, slow glycolysis. So, what is it that the sport needs in terms of number one, movement analysis, and then physiological analysis? Where are you getting the strength and power? Does your like Tom Brady with his TB12 talks about the fact that as a quarterback, he doesn't need incredible hypertrophy. He needs to have malleability. He needs to have muscles that are hydrated, that are healthy, that are in their elastic region. So if he falls down, he doesn't tear his bicep or hurt himself. So, what are the physiological needs in terms of strength and power? Somebody who's doing an offensive lineman might need to go through much more hypertrophy than somebody who's doing ballet. So, what are the physiological needs of a particular sport? What are the physiological needs during your seasons, during off season, during preseason? And then, has what are the potential areas that that sport could lead to injury? For instance, with gymnastics, it's wrist, ankle, shoulder injuries. With swimming, I'm assuming it's probably most likely hip flexor and overhead range of motion and impingement. With football, I'm assuming it's ACL tears and turf toe. And with people who are doing rowing, it's probably Osgood-Schlatter's disease and knee pain and hip pain. So, what are the potential areas for injury? And they're going to be all different based on whatever sport you're performing. So, that's pretty much the first part of the needs analysis is to evaluate the sport, all right, in terms of movement, physiology, and potential for injury. And the next thing that we have to do is evaluate the athlete. So, step one, what is what are the needs in regards to the sport and what are the needs in regards to the athlete? So the first thing that you want to do with the athlete is figure out what the training status is. Is this the first week of training? Is this the first time this person's trained with you ever? Is this they've trained with you for a number of months or a number of years? It's just they're coming right off of off-season training. Are they 8? Are they 11? Are they 15? Do they have testosterone? Do they have any prior knowledge of lifting? Have they gone through training at all? Like before June 4th is when my athletes are going to start to do their strength and conditioning hypertrophy training. Before that, we have to do at least a month of starting with very low weight, with almost no weight at all, and going through each of the exercises and establishing technique and timing and progression. So, what is the training status of the athlete, and what type of training program will that athlete need? Do they need a 12-month long periodization chart? Is it a 6-week training period? Is it a 6-month training period? What type of training program will the athletes need? Then, how long have they participated in any kind of previous training? Is this 1 year, 2 years? Are they well established? And what is the level of intensity involved in those previous training programs? All right. And then again, how much exercise technique do they have? So before I allow my athletes to really do anything with strength and conditioning, what we do is establish progression and technique. So for the entire month of April and May, that's what we're doing. Very little weight, trying to reestablish technique. So let's take a look at training status. All right. You can think of it as 3 different potential options here. They're either trained, or not. All right. I have beginner. A beginner is untrained, someone who has done no training or just began training. All right. Meaning that they haven't trained for longer than 2 months. And in those 2 months, they haven't really done more than 1 or 2 times per week. That means they're beginner. And when you set their training status, you're going to set their training status based on the beginner level. An individual who has worked for 2 to 6 months, all right, or is doing 2 to 3 times per week, they may have very basic experience with technique and such. They would be an intermediate training status. And if you've been training or working for more than a year and you're doing 3 to 4 times per week, then for the rest of this chapter, you'll be considered in this advanced training status. So for my athletes, I've worked with some athletes for years at a time, and we're in the gym 4 or 5 days a week. So for the most part, even though my athletes are young, they may be 8, 11 years old, 12 years old, they are in an advanced training status. So when I put together their strength and conditioning program, I put it together assuming that my athletes are in the advanced training status grouping. If I have a group of untrained athletes who've never worked with me before, to think that they should come in and do strength and conditioning program more than 2, maybe 3 days a week is not appropriately placing them in a training status background, and I could lead to injury, and I don't want that. So in assessing the athlete, what we need to do is we need to do a physical evaluation and test of each of these particular athletes to figure out what their training goal is. So let's go real quick. I'm going to go take a look at a couple of different assessments that we could do. Let me just show you here, chapter quizzes. Where is it? It is here, here, back. So here's a number, I think that this will work. Here's a number of different assessments that you could use, all right? Number one is that didn't work great. 1 second. If it doesn't work, then here. Is your 1.5-mile run. That will give you an assessment of your aerobic capacity. All right. Another assessment that you could do is your 12-minute run. All right. That would give you a different assessment of your VO2 max. But you could also do let's do this one here. So this is a hexagon test. What it is you create a hexagon on the floor. The athlete warms up. They start in the middle of the hexagon, and then they double leg hop from the center over to the side, back to the center, to the next side, back to the center, to the next side, back to the center, and you time it. And if somebody loses balance or takes an extra step or whatever, you collect the time it takes for you to do the assessment, and then you analyze the data based on, if I did like a right click, I would click on that link and it would go to an assessment page. And then you would analyze the data. You could do a t-test. A t-test is very similar. You have 4 cones. All right. You take a piece of tape and you make this shape on the ground. And then your athlete is going to start here. They're going to run. They're going to touch the tape or the cone, and then they're going to run back. And then they're going to run, and then they're going to touch here, and then they're going to run back. And then they're going to run and touch here and run back. And they time that, and that's a test of speed and agility. So there's all sorts of these different assessments that you can do. I'll just show you. You can do a 1RM bench press, standing long jump test, vertical jump test, YMCA bench press, flexibility exercise techniques, right? Many different assessments that we can learn and go through that will help you at this point of your needs analysis. So what you want to do is get an assessment of how physically fit your individual is. What is their 1 RM max bench press, their squat, their curl, their what is their how many push-ups can they do, how high can they do a vertical jump, how fast are they, and then you have to pick these assessments that are going to be sport specific. So you're going to evaluate your explosiveness in their jump, their speed of running, their VO2 max. And then what you're going to do is you're going to be able to use those results to select different tests or exercise plans that you want to use to make your client more powerful or more strong or have better agility or be able to jump better. And then what you can do is you can establish your training goals, whether or not you're trying to improve strength, power, hypertrophy, endurance, or agility, or whatever. And then figure out which one of these training goals are you going to focus on during each of your micro cycles that your season is broken down into. And your season should be broken down into these particular sports seasons, 4 different seasons. And we can start with, as soon as your championship is over, there should be some type of rest. Active rest, not doing nothing, but active rest. For my gymnasts, what I want to do in active rest is get rid of all of the forces on their bodies. So I want to get rid of running and pounding on the vault board and landing on hard surfaces. I want everything now done into a mat, into a pit, everything gentle, bouncing trampoline, easy on your back, but active rest. They can go run. They can do Zoom workouts for 3 weeks before we go back into the gym. Give the kids an opportunity to go with their family and walk and do different sports and stuff. So at the very end of the season, we want to do a post-season. All right. You want to do exercises there that are not very specific, and we don't really have a specific training goal during post-season. It's mostly just resting the brain. It's a neural muscular system. And then at the end of the season, sometimes throughout the stresses in the course of the season, those stresses, ramp up intensity and make it so that there's psychological stress. So the postseason should remove not only physical stress, but psychological and neurological stress as well. So 3-4 weeks of an active postseason. Then they have off season. And in the off season, they're so far removed from their competition that I don't mind if they're sore because of their strength and conditioning training. So during the off season, after this active rest in June, we're going to start muscle building. And we're going to start taking the muscle that we build and make it more strong and more powerful. After our off season, as we move in, our off season for me is going to be June through September. Then from September to November, we have our preseason. And we're going to start to do more movement specific things. Transition out of 4 or 5 days a week of doing our weightlifting and move towards more sport specific exercises. After that, we're going to be on our in season. And I really don't want to make my muscles bigger or stronger or more powerful. Whatever gains we make in the off season and the preseason, during season, we're done. We're not trying to put on more muscle mass. We're not trying to put on more strength. We're trying to take whatever we have and make it effective so that we can have a successful championship season. And I can make my athletes peak at the right time so that they're good when they need to be. So each of your training priorities should be broken down by the season in which you're trying to achieve those particular goals. Now, once you establish what your athlete's needs are, all right, the next thing that you're going to do is figure out what type of exercises you're going to have those athletes conduct. And your exercise type is going to be based on is going to have to be specific to the sport that you're trying to work with. All right. There's going to be different types of exercises chosen. There are going to be core exercise based on stabilizing your stomach and your back and your the overall stability of your body. But then there's also going to be assistance exercises, which are more specific to more fine motor patterns that are going to be conducting during that sport. These would be like bungee exercises, rotator cuff exercises, wrist, ankle exercises, exercises that will assist in the overall body in terms of performing that activity. There's going to be exercises that are designed to stabilize the structure of your body, like your farmer carries and your Turkish get-ups and arm bars and ankle alphabets, but there's also going to be other exercises that are designed to improve the strength and power of that sport, like your clean and jerks and your squat patterns and your Romanian deadlift patterns and your single arm row patterns and such. All right. We need to make sure that you're picking exercise types that are specific to the movement patterns that are going to be occurring within each of the sports that you're going to be working with. So somebody who needs to work on rebounding is going to be very different than somebody who needs to be working on, say, pivoting. Somebody who's working on dribbling is going to have very different strengths than somebody who's going to be working on an iron cross. And we need to make sure that we're doing flexion and extension exercises, abduction, adduction, um, uh, internal, external rotation, balancing leg, arms, core, back. We need to make sure that we're balancing muscles out, balancing your concentric and eccentric muscle ability, the ability to generate power and absorb power. So the specific exercises that you're choosing need to not only be um, varying enough to establish appropriate overreaching and specificity of a particular sport, but also need to make sure that it's particularly specific to the needs of each individual. So it's not the case that all of the exercises are going to be conducted by all of the athletes all of the time. And these exercises that you're selecting need to take into account the technical experience of the athlete. So, for instance, there's some exercises that require very little exercise technique, like a plank hold or a plank raise or a body weight jump. But then there are other exercises that require a large amount of technique, like clean and jerk or um, squat to press. So if I have young athletes who aren't able to even understand or don't have the strength to even understand or to develop these techniques, then I'll have to come up with other exercises. Typically for younger athletes, I'll use a lot of things like sandbags instead of barbells and weights, because if their technique is poor, they can always just dump the sandbag without any issues. So manipulating the tools that you're using to appropriately um, deal with lack of technique might be another thing that you would want to do. And then depends upon what you have available. Um, if I go to a new gym and the other gym doesn't have barbells and kettlebells, then I'll have to figure out some other way of doing the same exercises. If that's the case, usually I'll have the athletes get weight vests and ankle weights and manipulate the exercises that way. So all right, so step 2 involves like the selection of exercises. All right, so we've done our first step, which is the needs analysis of the athlete and the needs analysis of the sport. And in those, what we've done is we've established what our training goals are and what exercises we're going to choose. All right. And we need to make sure that we're choosing, and we have a number of exercises to choose from. So, I mean, we have to get a huge vocabulary of exercises, which means take a look at YouTube, right? Most of the time, the exercises aren't changing. Turkish get-ups, Romanian deadlifts, squats, presses, benches, curls, pull-ups, dips. These are all exercises that, most people are aware of. They're going to be core exercises, which are exercises that are going to recruit large muscle areas. All right. And we're going to have assistance exercises, which is usually recruiting smaller, stabilizing muscles. And we'll have to be able to have a knowledge of various exercise training modes to be able to um, um, help individuals with both aspects of these exercise types. There'll also need to be structural exercises, which are emphasizing loading the spine and maintaining the stiffness of your structure, so that you have some leverage to use your limbs with. If your body isn't strong enough and it continues to topple over, then when you go to lift a heavy book or something like that, then your core strength isn't strong enough to be able to use your arms as tools, as levers. So your core strength kind of makes your body stationary. It stabilizes it. It makes it so that it's stiffer, so that you can use your arms and legs to carry tools and things like that. And you're also going to be starting to work on power. And remember, power is the implementation of force through time. So if you're able to establish or distribute the force very quickly or explosively, that is how you would continue to work, or how you would work or address power. So we have to choose exercises that are going to be based on improving structure and stability, so we don't have rotator cuff injuries and subluxations of your humerus outside of your glenoid fossa, or stability issues. But we also have to have exercises that are going to make me more explosive and more powerful. We're going to have large enough exercise vocabulary to pick exercises that are going to be specific to each sport. And right now you might say, I don't even know what exercises I could choose from, but let me show you a couple of examples. For instance, if we're going to have somebody who is doing basketball and they want to work on exercises that are going to work on their ball dribbling and passing skills, well, they need to do something with their arm at about 90 degrees. All right. And do something with like arm extension, or extension of the elbow. So you might have them do close grip bench press. So their hands are about 90 degrees, and they maybe have a little bit of a lightweight, and they're laying on their back and they're just doing a bench press. And what that's going to do is it's going to mimic their hands being on a ball at about shoulder width apart and moving forward through a chest press motion. Or they could do dumbbell bench press if they don't have a bench. Or they could do tricep push down. Tricep push downs, your hands are kind of clasped together, and your elbows are tucked into your body, and you're extending your arms, and you're mimicking what it would like to be dribbling a ball. But that might be very different than somebody who's doing freestyle swimming, right? In that case, you might want to do lat pull downs with your arms straight, lateral shoulder raises from a plank support, or forward step lunges and working on your kicking through your hip flexors. Or somebody who's going to be doing rowing might want to do power work. All right, bent over rows, and do a lot of subscap and upper shoulder work. So you're going to have to be able to choose a number of different exercises. But what I would do is I would use the very ones that are listed on this particular on this particular chart here as your starting point for these exercises, right? So you're going to have to think about what are the movement patterns in the sport and how do I appropriately choose exercise patterns that are going to be specific and mimic the motions that are involved in that sport, right? And that's part two of this exercise selection, picking the appropriate type so that you can mimic the specific movements that are actually happening in that sport. And make sure in that exercise selection, you're balancing out the agonist versus the antagonist muscle because we want to appropriately build muscle balance, not only agonist versus antagonist, but concentric versus eccentric, generation versus absorption. Um, so we want to make sure that we're understanding muscle physiology in regards to um, the force velocity curve, the length tension curve, and make sure that we're not only picking the correct exercises, but the correct movements within those exercises to appropriately um, um, establish change in the neuromuscular system so that the changes that you are establishing are going to be functional in terms of improvement in sport performance. We also have to make sure that we establish the appropriate exercise technique with whatever exercises we're selecting. So for the entire month of April and May, I don't allow my athletes to use weight. What we do is I assume they're going to make mistakes because they're young and they don't know. So we do everything unweighted and I just watch them. I have them watch themselves in the mirror and take a look at their knees and ankles and their hips and what they're doing and give them things like keep your nose over your knee and keep your knee over your toes and give them landmarks of technique so that they can continue to remember, how I want them to do the exercises that I'm selecting. I also have to make sure that the equipment that we're using is going to be functional. A lot of this is based on, again, overreaching and pushing your body past its limits. So if I don't have weights and they're not going to be able to push their body past what they're normally used to, then I'm not going to establish muscle breakdown and we're not going to achieve our training goals. So I would have to figure out a way, if I don't have bench presses, if I don't have all of these things, how do I make the equipment available? So during COVID, what we did is we filled um, um, gallon jugs with water. That's 8.6 pounds. But if you fill a gallon jug with sand, it weighs 12 pounds. So we were able to manipulate the resistance, the forces, the intensity of training with whatever equipment we had available. Sometimes we can use body weight instead. All right. So, and then we have to figure out what time of day is it best for people to be doing these bouts of exercise. Um, for instance, I really just don't have a huge amount of time in the evening because that's when I work. So I'd have to appropriate time during the morning. But sometimes kids are in school and Zoom, and so they're also in the gym for 4 hours of practice, and then when do they do strength and conditioning after the 4 hours is over? Do they do it as part of the 4 hours? Do they do it in the beginning and then have workouts? So we have to make sure that we're choosing the correct times for our athletes to be engaging in these exercises. So once you've figured out what exercises you want your athletes to do, you have to figure out how frequently do you want them to do that. And that's going to be based on their, number one, training status, but also where are they in the season. So training frequency is the number of training periods per week. All right. And then the training status is going to determine how many days per week they can work out. So let's go here. If they are a beginner, meaning they have done this for less than 2 months, then their suggested training frequency is 2 to 3 times per week. So if I had athletes who have never done strength and conditioning before, to tell them that we're going to do it 4, 5, 6 days per week is crazy. Or for me to be hired at a gym and I go in, they say, okay, we do strength and conditioning 7 days a week, but these kids are 8 years old and just started doing this sport. I think that's probably a bit much. Now, for the most part, though, I've worked with my kids for years at a time. So all of my athletes are able to do 4, 5, 6, 7 days per week. Now, I believe Monday, Wednesday is a training day. Monday, Tuesday is a training day. Wednesday is a rest day. Thursday, Friday is a training day. So for the most part, I want my athletes to do 4 or 5 training sessions per week if we're doing resistance training, especially if we're doing hypertrophy training. And I want my athletes to save calories. So I usually go 4. I choose 4. 4 days a week of resistance training. Now, athletes who are highly trained um, can work more than athletes who are not trained. All right. And what you can do is you can establish different training routines. So you can do training routines that are based on 2 days of training. So if you're going to do 2 days of training, all right, you could do on Sunday, you could rest. On Monday, you do your lower body. Then on Tuesday, you do your upper body. Then you rest. Then you do lower body, upper body, rest. Lower body, upper body, rest. Lower body, upper body, rest. And that would result in 4 times per week. All right. You could have on training day 1, you do chest, shoulders, and triceps. Or, and then on, sorry, there's 3 different training things that you're focusing on per week. And on Sunday, you rest. On Monday, you do chest, shoulders, triceps, lower body, and back. So that would be like a 3-day training where you rest and then you do your 2 days of training. So depending upon your training frequency, all right, 4, 5, 6 days per week, you would put together whatever routine that you would need to make sure that you're balancing lower body and upper body. Make sure you're balancing your workout with your rest. Okay. Make sure you're balancing your push pull exercises. Anyway, so these are examples of ways that you could break down your week to establish your training frequency goals and not get stale or too repetitive in terms of the body parts that you're training. Training frequency is not only determined by how much exercise or how much training your athlete has experienced, but it also has to do with sports season. So when you're off season, you can train in terms of resistance training as much as you need. During season, you might want to cut down the number of times that you're working in terms of resistance training because you need to focus on more sport specific stuff here. So during the off season, I'll have my athletes do 4 days per week of resistance training. And you'll notice that off season and preseason, they both have the number 4. So I usually will do 4 days of resistance training for my athletes almost half of the year. Monday, Tuesday, Thursday, Friday, resistance training. Then during in season, I'll break that down to about 3 days a week. And then during postseason, we'll go down to none. All right, none, or make sure that you're resting, but lower the intensity of the weights. All right, so we can pick up our training load, exercise type. The next thing that we want to do is once we figured out the training frequency, we have to figure out their exercise order. All right, usually what you want to do is you want to start with your power exercises, exercises that use big muscle movements, big muscles. Do those first. And then followed by like exercise modes that require fewer and fewer muscles. And then what you do is your stability, strength, and conditioning exercises. All right, so start with big muscle groups and go smaller and smaller and smaller until you're doing fine-tune work. All right, let's just move on a little bit. Upper lower body exercises. Make sure that you alternate between upper and lower body exercises. Now you can alternate from one exercise to the next, or like this training program here does, they're alternating upper and lower body from one day to the next. So that would be fine. You can either alternate from one exercise to the next or from one day to the next, but you want to alternate between upper and lower body exercises. You also want to alternate between push and pull exercises. But in gymnastics, there's flexion and extension of the trunk and the stomach and the back. There's also rotation to the left and rotation to the right. In gymnastics, there's also unique things like, for instance, most people usually do a cartwheel with only one hand and one foot in front. So in order to establish good balance between muscles, I usually try to have them do each of these exercises to both sides, with their left side in front and with their right side in front, to establish appropriate muscle balance. And then you can also combine sets and do all sorts of stuff. All right, let's move on. In terms of training load and repetitions, remember, you could, and what we're doing here is establishing the appropriate intensity, training load. And you could either base that on the 1 RM max and percentages of your 1 RM max, which we've spoken about before, which is why we want to try to establish what our 1 RM max is, but we're going to have to establish a 1 RM max for every single one of the exercises that we do, for curls, for push-ups, and 1 RM max is for strength. So it's not for endurance training. So you'd have to do a 1 RM max for squats, for an RDL, for bench press, curls, all of them. So for me, I find using 1 RM max is difficult to establish the appropriate training loads. So what I do is establish what the training goal is. And if the training goal is hypertrophy, then I start to establish reps instead of my 1 RM max. And I showed you this before. If my goal is muscle building, then I want my athletes to work between 6 and 12 reps. If they're able to do 13, 14, 15, 16, then the weight is not intense enough for them to be getting bigger muscles. At that stage of the game, they're going to be working muscle endurance. If I want them to become stronger, I increase the weight more so they can only do between 2 and 6 reps. If they're able to do 7, 8, 9 reps, then I think that we need to increase the amount of weight so that they can only do between 2 and 6 reps. So I'm continuously working on how much weight they're able to lift. Right? So rather than trying to figure out the training load through 1 RM max testing and using percentages of the 1 RM max, I try to use that slide. All right, this is an example. This is how to establish your 1 RM max. I kind of skip a lot of that stuff, and I use just this. All right, but you would establish the intensity of the exercise based on 1 RM max or based on your number of reps. And you're going to assign each of your athletes a training intensity that is going to be at a particular percentage of the 1 RM max. For instance, if you want to work on strength, or power or hypertrophy. Hypertrophy is muscle building. You could work between 6 to 12 reps, and that's going to be equal to about 67 to 85% of my 1RM max. So I find this is much more difficult to measure than counting the number of reps, especially when I got, 15, 20, 35 kids. So I just manipulate the number of reps to get to my 1RM max load percentage goal rather than manipulating this to get to my repetition goal. So I think that's easier to manipulate when I'm working with kids. But I guess if I was trying to demonstrate my ability as a strength and conditioning specialist, I probably would use the 1RM max assessment, and then show my boss that I really know how to, use percentages of the 1RM max. But now, if you're working at 65% of your 1RM max and you're expecting that your clients are going to get stronger or more powerful, then you're probably wrong. Or if you're working at 85% and you only want to work on off-season hypertrophy goals, it could be the case that you're just stressing their bodies too much and don't need to go to 95%. It could be the case that you could accomplish the same goals at 65 to 85%, save calories, save tissue breakdown, right, and accomplish the same goals. So that's how I establish my intensity. Okay, let's take a look more. Progression of training load. Okay, estimating a load body area increase. Let's just take a look at a couple more of these graphs because they're pretty useful. Again, I use all of these guidelines here to establish the appropriate volume. I take a look and see how many days they're going to be working out, how many hours during that day are they going to be working out, what is their training status, and what are we trying to achieve in terms of our training goal. The volume is the amount that you lift in a particular session, and volume is a product of your reps and sets and the intensity. Okay, set is a number of times that you're repeating a group of exercises. Repetition is the number of exercises or the number of times you're doing that particular exercise within a set. And the load volume is the number of sets multiplied by the number of reps multiplied by the weight. All right, so let's take a look at this stuff here. If your strength or if your training goal is to build strength, you want to do less than 6 reps and you want to do 2 to 6 sets. But notice here, this here includes the number 3. If I want to work on power training, it also includes the number of 3. If I want to do hypertrophy training, it also includes the number 3, and same thing with muscle endurance. So I think what I usually would tell people to do is 8 to 10 exercises, 3 sets, and just manipulate the goals. All right, manipulate the repetitions. So keep everything easy. 8 to 10 exercises, balance them with push and pull, with upper and lower body, with flexion extension, with internal external rotation, with rotation to the left, rotation to the right, power absorption, power generation, eccentric and concentric. But 10 exercises, 3 sets, and the only thing that I'm manipulating is the reps within those sets to be able to achieve my training goal. By the way, if you have anything and would like to stop me at any time, feel free to do so. All right, where are we at? The next thing that we would look at is how much rest should you have your athletes utilize. Well, if they're trying to improve their strength profile, then they would want to rest 2 to 5 minutes between their exercises. If they're trying to improve their power, it would still be about 2 to 5 minutes. But if they're trying to improve hypertrophy, you need to break those muscles down a bit more. So you would have a little bit less rest and stress those muscles and try to get that micro damage to happen so that there can be a release of testosterone and growth factor and such. What do we got? Okay, so we want to make sure that you're appropriately choosing the correct rest periods. All right. So this is what a complete needs analysis is. Now, the needs analysis that I would have had you do for your particular project would have been step 1, where I would give you a scenario. Here, maybe I'll just even show you what the needs analysis assignment was. One second, lab practical, final grades, lab project, here we go, final lab project. So the needs analysis was, you paired up with a member of class, and now you're going to assemble data that you collected throughout the semester and deliver a comprehensive exercise and wellness program for your partner. So during the semester, you're taking your heart rate, blood pressure, your body composition, and you're pretty much doing an assessment, a physical wellness assessment. And given that information, what I want you to do is put together a needs analysis for your partner in class. And I would want you to establish maybe real or pretend goals and objectives, and try to support your suggestions in your project with the information presented in this chapter, because this is the information presented by the American College of Sports Medicine and other credible literature, which is this chapter 15 I'm showing you. And you'll need to tell me you'll need to give me a couple of biomarkers like heart rate, blood pressure, body composition, which are going to be your baseline data. Now, you could also use your 1RM max test, your 1.5 mile walk test, your T test, your hexagon test, your vertical jump test. And what you would do is put together a needs analysis. All right, you would tell me their height, weight, body mass index, body fat percent, resting heart rate, and VO2 max. You would establish fitness and wellness goals for your client. What is their training history? This is all just kind of like interview stuff that you're doing. And you're doing the first part of your needs analysis. What are the needs of the sport? What are the needs of your client? Then you would do a comprehensive 2-day fitness program that includes, right, something like, one second, something like this here. Just give me 1 second. Where it was something like this, right? You would have given me training day 1 and training day 2. What would you have done for your 8 to 10 lower body exercises? And what would you have suggested for their 8 to 10 upper body exercises? That's what I would have asked you to do. All right. So I would have asked you here to give me a comprehensive, which is a 2-day fitness program that includes a list of goals. All right. And maybe the goal for that 2-week program is muscle building or whatever. It's just 2 weeks within that 12-week hypertrophy training cycle. And then you would give me what are the sets, which is always 3, the reps, which is depending upon your training goal, and the weights. All right. And you could say that you could say the amount of weight would be a percentage of my 1 RM max, but the percentage would be just totally based on this particular. Okay, so I skipped a little bit of that. Oops. Would be based on these reps that you want here, and that would be based on this percentage. So here you would say, my goal is strength. We're going to use 3 exercises. We're going to use, 8 to 10 exercises, 3 reps each. 8 to 10 exercises, 6 reps each, which would be about 85% of my 1 RM max.